Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. We have been doing a lot of podcasts related to product management. Today's podcast is going to be more interesting. We have Avishek, who was also my colleague. Currently, he's working as a senior product manager at Delhivery. Before that, he used to work with Airtel also. So he has worked with very big companies. So we are going to discuss how to take decisions at scale, data-driven decision making, and much more. Let's get into the podcast. Thanks a lot, Avishek, for joining. If you can give a quick introduction to audience, it would be helpful.
Thanks, Manoj. I guess you already said a lot. I have been working with Delhivery for last 2 years. Right now I'm SPM at Delhivery. Earlier I was working with Airtel for 3 years, where I mostly worked with the payments part of Airtel, the bank as well as the telecom. And with Delhivery, I have been working with the B2B logistics part of Delhivery. Mostly we take care of everything that requires to move a shipment, from one place to another, including the financial part of it, the operation part of it, as well as the marketing part of it. So that's what I do here at Delhivery. And thanks for this call.
Perfect. I have curated a list of questions based on audience interest. I'll ask the questions one by one. First question is generally product management is something that not everyone, it's not a straightforward role or not a popular, right? It was not popular. Today it's very popular. But how did you discover product management?
Mostly it starts with data. Then it starts with, or it can start with stakeholder management. And over the time, you realize that there is a team that basically adds a lot of value. They have a very pre-planned roadmap. Their decision makings are very analytical based. The feedback loops are very. There exists a strong feedback loop within that team as well as the customer. And then you get curious. What exactly this team does. And for me, the answer was product team actually, right? So there was a product team at Airtel. They were doing all these kind of things that I just said. Got me very interested because what I was doing was most of a business part of it, like business analytics part of it, right? But once I had multiple interactions with them, it looked like I can do this as well. I switched to product in that case, which is a bit tough if you start with a fresher, right? You have to start with as a product analyst mostly. You have to do very good at data, and thereafter you have to be very good at stakeholder management, and maybe then you get a chance to become product manager and further on.
Got it. So the next question is you work in logistics, right? So the audience is not very straightforward. Like if you see any other consumer brand, as a PM, you will be able to easily empathize with the user. First question is what is empathy in general, right? In lot of articles, skills, empathy is one of the key skill that is written, right? And how can one improve their empathy skills as a product manager?
I guess any part of the job includes two of your abilities. One that tests your IQ and the second one that tests your EQ. Mostly when you talk about the empathy part of it, it's mostly how well you understand your users, let's say, or how well you understand your stakeholder in general. For example, let's say if you're having a discussion with a stakeholder, you need to understand what exactly the person is trying to communicate, number one. And number two, your ability to understand what problems that person is facing, let's say, who is trying to communicate, right? Most of the times you will acknowledge that, person is able to not express himself or herself very well, right? So there comes the empathy. You have to literally feel what that person is trying to communicate to you, right? I guess the empathy is just just your ability to feel what others are trying to communicate to you, right? And it basically is coming from the EQ part of it and makes you better at stakeholder management. That's how I will define empathy. Should be a part of all the roles, not just let's say the product part of role, but let's say for any role where you interact with stakeholders, empathy should be there.
Got it. I think the next question is so very important thing for a product manager is taking decisions, right? And on that, the more important part is how one can take data-driven decision, right? What is data-driven decision making and how important it is for a product manager?
This is a real nice question, especially coming from you, because you yourself are good at data, and I learned so much of you from while working with you actually. Coming to the data part of the question, I literally believe that one should, when you actually decide what to build, right, that involves a lot of data crunching. Usually, if you look at the product part of it, it has a discovery problem. You have to identify which problems to solve for, right? When you do that, you get a long list of problem statements to solve, right? And then you have to basically prioritize. Now, the way you prioritize is basically put weightage on what's the impact versus the effort, right? Now, every time you have to put some weightage to it, you have to prioritize a particular task over the other task. Data kicks in. You have to validate how much of the effects will be there if I make this product first compared to the second one, for example, right? So, data comes very handy when you have to make the decision about prioritization. Point number one. Point number two, when you pick a particular problem statement, right, you also have to do a very well analysis of how much improvement this can bring in your, let's say, customer's life cycle, or for example, in the product that you're building, right? Again, the data kicks in. You have to go and look at the historical data. You have to be very good at, let's say, analytics part of it, right? For me, it was like, you have to fetch the data correctly. You have to understand which data points you have to take care of, and then basically validate whatever you're hypothesizing, right? So every time you make a product, you make some hypothesis that if I do this, this will improve. Every time you make such hypothesis, do validate it with data, right? So that's where I guess the data decision making comes in.
Got it. But apart from data also, right, in a product manager's day, there are a lot of decisions they need to take. It might not just be dependent on data. There might be some decision that you might to take based on instinct. You might not have any time to analyze. You have to say yes or no immediately, right? So how can, in general, PMs should do better, can do better, take better decisions, right? Irrespective of availability of data, instinct, or even user research. There are multiple ways to take a decision, right? How can PMs take better decisions?
That's actually right. I know most of the times when you are presented a problem, you wouldn't know where the data exists, whether the data is there, for example, or not. Especially it comes when you have to launch something new, right? When you have to do some primary and secondary kind of search, it's not possible to get accurate data, right? And that's what, and then you have to basically peg yourself with market, what market is doing, for example, or let's say what your competition is doing, for example, right? And these two things can be pegged at. But apart from that, if you look at the intuition part of it, mostly it comes with experience. I mean, honestly, let's say if I have, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years experience, I won't be saying that, every time I make a decision which is intuitive would be correct, right? And when I am not confident about that decision being correct, I wouldn't basically utilize all of my resources on developing such kind of products, right? So basically, if you're an experimental based company, for sure you will do that. But if you're, let's say, a company which is heavily prioritizing on impact, you wouldn't like to make a lot of developments based on your intuition, because let's say one, you will have lesser experience in doing that. Number two, even if you're experienced, you don't know how much accurate your interpretation would be, right? That's correct. Try to peg yourself with the market. Try to peg yourself with the competitor if that kind of states arise. But usually avoid putting a lot of weightage on the intuition part of decision making.
Got it. I think understanding what the market and user and in general the business wants helps you to take. And next thing is like if you see other career options, right? Let's say developer or marketing, they have a certain way to track are they growing in their career or not, right? But the product manager role is not so straightforward. What are the key things a PM should look for in their career to measure their growth, right? Are they really growing in their career or not? Because it's very complex, not very straightforward, right? Maybe you are working in the same business unit, maybe you are built several products, maybe you are just working on improvement, right? There's a lot of different things a PM would do. In a company, a PM would just work on improving a feature. In other company, the PM would do just 0 to 1, right? How can one measure their career growth?
See, I think I retrospect a lot on this particular question. I just keep thinking about how I can excel in the career I have chosen, right? If I give a answer on the lighter note, if your stakeholder directly calls you to tell you a problem, this is what they're facing, and over the tea, over the dinner, if they are inviting you and they're having this discussion, think that you are doing well in your career. And basically, in crux, I would say that I have never seen a product manager who is not good at stakeholder management. I have seen non-tech product managers, who are not very good at technical skills. They would say that, oh, I can't basically fetch query, give me an analyst to do that. I can't basically write a good code, for example. Let tech team basically scope out the technical part of it. But I've never seen a product manager who is bad at stakeholder management. I think the very first thing that you should learn is stakeholder management. Again, empathy plays a big role. Try to communicate with them. Try to understand what they are trying to say. Sometimes they will say, but they don't know what problems they're trying to explain. So understand what they're trying to explain. Derive your own meanings or your own conclusions out of it. But yeah, talk with people. Be very good at handling people. It's a people-centric role. Number one. Number two would be, of course, what kind of metrics you want to track. For example, let's say the company where I am at, right? We have certainly a very sharply defined metrics, right? That we want to excel at, right? So keep tracking metrics. I mean, the second part of it, which I want to answer, is the data part, right? The first part is the stakeholder management part, and the second part is the data part, actually. So be very good at data. If somebody's presenting you a problem statement, you should be able to prioritize it instantly by saying that, look, this part of the problem would create this much of impact, and hence this is the priority for me to solve for, right? And data part kicks in very early. And that's why I said, when you transition in a product role, you start with an analyst mostly, then you become a product manager role. Why? Because you start with the data part of it, then you learn the stakeholder management part of it, and thereafter you become a reliable source of information as well as a reliable source of, reliable source who can basically take up the challenges. I will say that look at two parts of it: how good you are at stakeholder management and how good you are at data, basically. And of course, as you grow up, to a SPM role, to a director role, you have to strategize things, and you have to participate, you have to create AOPs. Those things also kick in. But for the audience that basically watches us, two part of the problem statement is very important: stakeholder management and data part of it.
Got it. I think this podcast will also be watched by people who are aspiring to become a product manager or just trying to transition into a product role. But stakeholder management is something I think not other job will have this as a skill that's needed, right? So what is stakeholder management, if you can explain, and what are key steps that one can take to manage stakeholders better?
Sure. So let's define it. Let's break this into part, actually, and I will do it on fly. I'll try to do it on fly, actually. If you look at stakeholder management, basically as a product manager, you are interacting with multiple teams. Right? You have a tech team at the core, you have a design team, you have your commercial teams, business team, you have your finance team, operation, marketing, and the list goes on. The QA is there, actually. Right? You can have some other teams like legal team that you are working with, for example. You have inside sales. There are so many teams actually you work with, right? Now, why it's important for you to basically ensure that you are able to keep everybody on track about what's happening in the company, right? For example, let's say you're building a product. Number one, all the relevant stakeholders should be aware about it. What comes in the communication part. To be very good at stakeholder management, be very nice at communicating things, right? So be very crisp at communicating what you are building, what's the timeline, what's the call out, right? If you need a buy-in from somebody, you take the buy-in part of it, right? One is the communication part of it. Second is basically influencing, the ability to negotiate, basically. When I was in my role at Airtel, I had a great deal of interaction with outside stakeholders, the people who are outside of Airtel, and negotiated a variety of contracts and commercials, etc. So give me a very good view about how to influence people. And again, data kicks in. When you try to influence a stakeholder that, look, this is what I'm doing, and this is what basically the impact will create, right? Again, the data part comes in, but the first part is communication. Second part is influencing people, right? You have to be very good at influencing people, and for that you have to back it up with the data, or back it up with, let's say, by pegging with market, or let's say pegging with the competitor average. These are the two key essential parts of stakeholder management. I think that's where one should start with.
The next thing is, so let's say, I think you have worked at Airtel, now at Delhivery. Both are companies which are building products for millions of users, right? And basically, these are scalable products. What are some advice that you can give to aspiring PMs or PMs in other startups for building products at scale?
Sure. Mostly when you think of a scale, you have to think of the number of times that particular application will get used, right? And it can be, for example, in delivery, right? For example, the logistic company usually, right, is the number of shipment you process, for example, right? So that would basically be equivalent to the number of consumers who are using a B2C app, for example. So all I'm saying is that for an application which is B2C facing, scalability will be to basically ensure that a lot of customers can use it, for example. The same feature, the same module. For a company like logistics company, which is, let's say, a B2B driven company, some part of it, your scalability should be that should be able to process as many shipments as possible with, let's say, the same module, same feature, right? First of all, identify basically what exactly brings scale to your product. For me, what brings scale to my product is basically the number of shipments. For B2C companies, I'm assuming what brings scale to them is the consumers, right? That basically use that particular application or website, right? One is to identify what brings scale to your product. Number two, when you're trying to create a product, try to think, just kind of zoom out and think that, how can it be more generalized? Every time, let's say, you imagine writing a PRD, for example, or writing a Jira, for example, just zoom out and think that how can you basically generalize those specific points of it. Why? Because let's say tomorrow when you have to extend your same product to multiple other users, right? Would this product break? Would this product be scalable? That's the question you should keep asking at the time of PRD and at the time of Jira itself, when you're doing the tech scoping part of it. Third, to build a scalable product, you necessarily have to sit with tech team. You have to understand what is the, let's say, constraint that they have on the tech side of it. For example, if I use some terms about it, let's say you are running something on the Elastic part of it. do their Elastic support such large amount of data, for example, right? Or what is the latency that will be bringing in, that you will bring in if you have a heavy design part of it, right? So try to sit with tech team, try to analyze the latency part of it, try to analyze the scalability part of it, try to analyze whether the systems they are using at the back end, be it data pipeline, be it, let's say, the Elastic part of it, will they be able to handle such a big load, right? And if not, then how? I guess this should be the questions coming from a product manager to a tech team. Have a closed meeting. Try to close these points to ensure that your product is scalable. Usually, when you build a product in a B2B company, you try to make it customized. You look at, let's say, I have a five clients to basically deal with. I will try to make sure that my product basically caters to use case of these 5 clients, for example. But when you scale, you will keep adding clients, for example, right? Then your product should not be like, every time you have to go and change the code, every time you have to bring it in the sprint cycle and improve, right? Try to have these discussions very early with the tech team, how to make products scalable, whether the system they are using is scalable or not. Can it support so many iterations or not? Can it support so many events or not? So yeah, this should be a discussion with tech team and have it at the time of creating a PRD.
Perfect. I think the next question is, as we discuss about tech team, as a PM, right? You find a problem, you have a solution, right? Now there are two parts. You have the right solution, you want to ship it exactly as you imagine, and two is you want to ship it at the right time, as a promised time to the stakeholder, right? So as far as the most important people who work in this, the builders, are developers and designers, correct? How can a PM work with developers and designers so that he can communicate better and make sure the product gets delivered, the right product gets delivered on the right time?
Sure. And that's really an important question. Thankfully, I've worked with so many tech teams in different capacities and different kind of people I have interacted with. What I realize is that to a developer, you need to tell them two things. One, what exactly you are building, like not just the product part of it, but what impacts it create on business. I see that mostly when people communicate to tech people, they usually have a PRD in hand. They have a Jira, or let's say whatever story you write on, you have that thing in hand, and that's where you start having a tech discussion. I think just take a step back. The step zero should be to start explaining them why this thing is important that you're building. What's the business context of it, right? Number one. Number two, have a very detailed product description, product document basically that you are basically preparing, right? And try to ensure that you are covering the edge cases. Try to ensure that you are focusing on the language in which you are communicating. Try to ensure that you are being as objective in writing a product document as possible. That's the second part of it. And third part of it, I will say, is not to wait for the end of sprint cycle to basically check, what the development is and how it's going on. Try to have a repo with your developer where you basically just ask that person, where the development is, how much delay you're expecting, for example. Is there something you want to call out? Sometimes you have to basically go and ask the right questions to developers, and then they will actually tell you that these are the issues he's facing. Maybe there will be a certain amount of delays, for example, right? Have a good communication with the developers. One starts with explaining them the business context, why this product is being built. Second starts with giving them a detailed product document, not to leave any, for example, mostly when I see why timelines get extended, it's because discoveries are made once the sprint cycle starts. You have a product now which is already being written, and now you say that add this feature add that condition, etc., right? So that basically delays. Try to have everything scoped out before you give it to a developer. Of course, that includes the design part of it as well. And the third part basically is communication. Keep asking, keep basically ensuring that if there is any issue, just come out and just tell me if there is any anticipated delay. Usually, what happens if you don't do this is that you will get the extension of timelines in the very last day when it was supposed to be delivered. Say it's supposed to be delivered on 21st of April. You will on 20th of April, you will get a message that there's a 5-day delay. I mean, you should not end up in that situation because you are not communicating. Try to have a good communication with developers.
Got it. I think having a good communication, following up with them and clearing out any blockers they have and giving the right scope before the sprint.
That's right. And if you are very, very on a lighter note, basically take them out for drinks. I mean, they really give you a better tat, I have seen.
Yeah, that's like a secret tip. The last question is, what are the top 3 learnings from your product management experience?
Okay, there's a lot of learning. The very first will be to understand that not everything can be solved at the same time, right? Which basically brings you to the point where you start understanding prioritization. So what I mean to say is that, let's say, if you are presented with 5 different problem statements, you have to understand, number one, that not all of them can be solved at once. Number two, you have to understand how to fetch data to basically ensure that you are able to prioritize correctly. So one point that you have to learn is basically prioritization. And that learning comes in when you basically repeatedly go through a sprint cycle. You are repeatedly, let's say, given a multiple problems, and then you have to basically ensure that you are able to pick all of them as per your bandwidth. Okay, right? So that's point number one. Point number two is communication. Again, everything that you have to do with the empathy, with the stakeholder management, with the right communication, with the right timeline, right? So second part is communication that you have to learn. So as a product manager, I guess if I say that what I have learned so far in this role, and that will really help me grow, let's say, in the future, one is basically to understand the prioritization part of it. The second is to basically ensure that you are communicating very well. And of course, the third part will be, let's say, to have an experience of doing that sprint cycle again and again, launching a product, taking the feedback, that tech part of it, basically writing the product document, scoping with tech team, right? Things actually come in as a third part of it. So yeah, these three things are the part that you basically learn when you kind of go into this kind of role and then try to grow over there.
Yeah, I think thanks a lot, Abhishek, for explaining all the questions with very clear answers and also with examples. So yeah, before we conclude the podcast, do you want to say anything to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I have seen a lot of curiosity around product management actually lately, right? I mean, I guess 5 years earlier, it was not that the case, right? Now there are a lot of product managers, aspiring ones especially. And what I have seen also is that now apart from consultancy in the IIMs and let's say MBA colleges, product management actually seems to be one of the career choice of all these people, right? All those fresh graduates who are coming to this kind of role, I will say that get a grab on data, be very good at data. Some of the best CXOs I have actually worked with are so good at data that you will be surprised to know that they are able to prioritize the things so well, just because they understand data. So one is try to understand data as much as possible. Don't be shy of learning tools like SQL, like Excel, or any other large data tools you want to learn. Try to get your hands dirty and be very good at data management, right? And analysis. So one is that. And the second part I will say is that try to be very open-minded. When you are presented a problem statement, everybody tries, for example, when you are given a problem statement, everybody tries to bring in a solution directly, right? I mean, that's the usual approach. So if I give a problem statement, somebody will directly throw an answer to me, right? I mean, that's something you have to do away with in this role. Try to deep dive, try to deep dive in the problem statement, try to break down the problem statement, and then basically bring a solution over what you have understood and what data you have basically fetched out. And of course, what stakeholder management has communicated. So if you are a new joinee, try to ensure that two things are there very well. One, you are very good at data, number one. And number two, try to ensure that you are able to break down the problem statement very correctly, right? And then basically bring the solution instead of directly jumping to the solution part of it. That's mostly what I see when freshers basically come to this role. They try to jump to the solutions. Try not to do that actually.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Abhishek, for your time. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you.